I'm Carmen, 32 years old, and a construction project manager who's always been the responsible one in my family. For years, I've been paying my parents' mortgage even though I moved out long ago. Last month, after an explosive argument, my mom screamed at me to get out and never come back, all because I questioned why they needed an expensive kitchen renovation while I was still covering their house payment. After years of being taken for granted, I finally reached my breaking point. Before I share how I stood up for myself in the aftermath that shocked my entire family, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, hit that like button, and subscribe to hear how I finally took back control of my life. I grew up in a middle-class neighborhood in Portland, in a blue colonial house with a small yard that my dad meticulously maintained every weekend. Our street was lined with similar homes, all occupied by families trying to maintain the appearance of financial stability, while many, including mine, struggled behind closed doors. As the oldest of 3 children, I learned responsibility early. My brother Derek is 28 now, working as a teacher in California. My sister Rachel is 25, recently graduated with a nursing degree and living in Seattle. I'm proud of them both, but there's always been an unspoken understanding that I would be the one to handle family problems, especially financial ones. My parents, Martha and Richard, weren't bad people. They just never quite figured out how to live within their means. Mom always wanted the nicest things on our street. The newest car, the best Christmas decorations, the most impressive graduation parties for us kids. Dad worked as a sales manager for an office supply company, making decent money but never enough for Mom's aspirations. He'd smile and nod at her requests, then work overtime for months to make it happen. I watched this pattern my entire childhood. I got my first job at 16, working after school at a local hardware store. I told everyone it was to save for college, but the truth was that I was helping with groceries and utility bills that my parents couldn't quite cover. By 17, I was contributing $300 a month to household expenses. My friends were saving for cars and prom. I was making sure our electricity stayed on. College was a blur of exhaustion. While studying engineering, I worked full-time at a construction company, starting in the warehouse and slowly working my way up. I lived at home to save money, giving my parents $800 monthly for rent. Money that I knew went toward their mortgage. I rarely complained. It was just what I did. After graduation, I moved quickly up the ranks at Westbrook Construction, becoming a project manager by 27. The money was good, but my responsibilities at home never lessened. When I finally moved out at 24 to a small apartment downtown, my financial support to my parents continued. If anything, it increased. 4 years ago, when I was 28, Dad lost his job during company restructuring. He was 55 then, with minimal savings and mounting credit card debt I hadn't known about. They were 3 months behind on their mortgage when I stepped in. What started as a temporary help situation became permanent. I took over the entire $2,000 monthly payment, draining my savings and putting my own financial goals on hold. My apartment is nice but modest, 20 minutes from my parents' house. I drive a 10-year-old Toyota, while my mother recently insisted they needed a new SUV. I postponed buying a home of my own because all my potential down payment money went to saving theirs. Every time I mentioned scaling back my support, Mom would make comments about family loyalty and remembering who changed my diapers. My relationship with my mother has always been strained. Martha is the kind of woman who remembers every mistake and forgets every sacrifice. When I was promoted last year, her first question wasn't about my accomplishment, but whether this meant I could help them renovate their bathroom. Dad, Richard, and I have always been closer, but he's an avoider who lets Mom set the family tone. He calls me privately to thank me for my help, but never stands up to her when she demands more. Derek and Rachel escape the financial burden by moving far away. They call on holidays and send modest gifts on birthdays. I don't blame them. They recognized the unhealthy dynamics earlier than I did and protected themselves. Still, it meant the entire weight fell on my shoulders. My personal life has suffered tremendously. Dating becomes complicated when you're spending thousands each month supporting parents who are perfectly capable of working but choose not to. My last girlfriend, Jessica, ended our relationship after watching my mother berate me for being 10 minutes late to Sunday dinner, a dinner I had paid for and prepared. "You'll never stand up to her," Jessica said as she packed her things, "and I can't watch this forever." My resentment grew slowly, like water gradually filling a bucket. Each dismissive comment from Mom, each apologetic shrug from Dad, each family emergency that mysteriously required exactly the amount of my most recent bonus. They all added drops until I was nearly overflowing. Still, family obligation kept me in place. Who else would help them, if not me? Friends tried to point out the imbalance. My best friend Mike would shake his head when I canceled plans because my parents needed something. "They're using you, Carmen," he'd say. I'd laugh it off, but the words stung because I knew they contained truth. Deep down, I was beginning to realize I wasn't helping my parents. I was enabling them. But breaking free from patterns established over decades isn't easy, especially when those patterns are reinforced with guilt and emotional manipulation. By my 32nd birthday, I was exhausted. Financially, emotionally, and physically. Something had to change, but I had no idea how devastating that change would be. The weeks leading up to our explosive confrontation were particularly stressful. At Westbrook Construction, we were racing to complete the Franklin office tower, a $20 million project running 2 weeks behind schedule. As project manager, I was pulling 60-hour weeks, arriving before sunrise and leaving well after dark. My phone constantly buzzed with crisis texts from subcontractors and angry emails from clients. My 32nd birthday came and went without acknowledgement from my family. No card, no call, not even a text message. When I mentioned it casually to Mom 3 days later, she said, "Well, you're an adult now, Carmen. Do you really need us to sing to you?" Dad at least looked embarrassed, but he said nothing. I told myself it didn't matter. I was too busy for celebrations anyway. That same week, Mom called about renovating their kitchen. Not minor updates. She wanted custom cabinets, marble countertops, and high-end appliances. The Andersons next door just redid theirs, she explained, as if that justified the $30,000 estimate she'd already obtained. When I hesitated, she reminded me that the house would eventually be my inheritance, so I should view it as an investment in my future. The manipulation was so transparent, it actually made me laugh after I hung up. The real shock came 3 days later. My colleague Brad returned from vacation raving about a Caribbean cruise he'd taken. "You should have seen this older couple on our excursion," he said. They were living it up, buying rounds for everyone. Super fun people from Portland named Richard and Martha. My parents. On a luxury cruise they'd never mentioned, while claiming they couldn't afford their property taxes. I called my brother Derek that night, trying to maintain composure. "Did you know Mom and Dad went on a cruise?" I asked. His awkward silence told me everything. "Rachel mentioned something about it," he finally admitted. "I thought you knew." They said it was their anniversary present to themselves. They'd been married in October. It was currently June. The following weekend, I met Mike for beers at our usual sports bar. After listening to me vent for an hour, he set down his glass and looked me straight in the eyes. "Carmen, I'm saying this as someone who loves you. Your parents are taking advantage of you, and they won't stop until you make them stop. They're not bad people," I defended weakly. "Didn't say they were. But they're treating you like an ATM, not a son. When was the last time they asked about your life, your happiness, anything that wasn't related to what you could give them?" I couldn't answer. My therapist, Dr. Wilson, whom I'd started seeing for stress management, was equally direct during our Tuesday session. "What you're describing is a classic enabling relationship," she said. "By constantly rescuing your parents from financial consequences, you're preventing them from developing better habits, and you're sacrificing your own well-being in the process." "So I should just let their house get foreclosed?" I asked, the very thought making my stomach twist. "That's a false dichotomy, Carmen. There are many options between bankrolling their lifestyle and abandoning them completely. The question is, are you ready to establish boundaries knowing they'll resist?" I thought about it all week as the pressure at work intensified. A critical shipment of specialty glass was delayed, potentially pushing our completion date back further. I spent 3 straight days negotiating with suppliers, appeasing the client, and revising schedules. By Friday evening, I was running on caffeine and 4 hours of sleep. That's when I decided it was time for a serious conversation with my parents about finances. I wouldn't cut them off abruptly. That seemed cruel. But I needed to establish a timeline for reducing my support. Maybe decrease the mortgage payment by $500 every 6 months until they resumed responsibility. It seemed reasonable, gradual, fair. I called and invited them to dinner at Riverside Grill, their favorite restaurant. My treat, I said, though, that was always implied. I'd like to discuss something important. Mom immediately asked if I was finally dating someone worthy of introduction. I let her believe that might be the topic, knowing she'd be more likely to show up. Saturday evening arrived. I'd prepared talking points, practiced my delivery, and even written potential responses to their objections. I felt nervous, but resolved. This conversation was long overdue. They arrived 20 minutes late. Mom complained about the table location, insisted on speaking to the manager about the wine selection, and sent back her appetizer for being too cold in the center. Dad offered apologetic smiles to the waitstaff and me. I waited until after the main course to bring up my prepared topic. I wanted to talk about the financial arrangements we've had in place. I began carefully. I've been thinking. Did you hear that the Wilson's son just bought them a vacation home in Bend? Mom interrupted. 2 bedrooms with a mountain view, for his parents' retirement. This derailed my carefully planned opening. Mom, I'm trying to have a serious conversation about, and Patricia's daughter takes her to New York every year for Christmas shopping. I've always wanted to see the windows at Macy's during the holidays. She looked at me pointedly. Dad cleared his throat. Martha, let Carmen speak. I'm just saying that family takes care of family, she sniffed. It's how I raised him. By the time dessert arrived, I'd made 3 attempts to discuss finances, each diverted by Mom's stories about neighbors' children and their grand gestures of familial devotion. My frustration mounted as my rehearsed speech remained undelivered. Maybe we should continue this conversation at your house. I finally suggested paying the $200 bill while Mom wrapped half her dessert to take home. The drive to their house was tense, with Mom chatting about kitchen renovation ideas and Dad sitting silently in the passenger seat. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white, all my careful planning dissolving into a simmering anger I struggled to contain. We arrived at their house around 8:30 in the evening. The same house I'd grown up in, the same house whose mortgage I now paid. Mom immediately kicked off her shoes in the entryway, leaving them for someone else to trip over, her typical habit. Dad went straight to his recliner and turned on the television as if preparing a retreat from the coming discussion. Before you get comfortable, I said, turning off the television, I really need to have this conversation. Mom was already in the kitchen, putting her leftover dessert in the refrigerator. The mortgage payment was 2 days late this month, she called out. The bank sent a notification. It's embarrassing to get those, Carmen. And there it was. The perfect opening, though not the one I'd planned. There was an issue with my bank's autopay system, I explained, following her into the kitchen. I fixed it as soon as I realized. I've been working 70-hour weeks on the Franklin project, and some things slipped through the cracks. She shut the refrigerator door with more force than necessary. Well, your father and I depend on you to be responsible. We've scheduled our lives around your commitment. The word commitment hit me like a slap. When had I ever committed to paying their mortgage indefinitely? It had started as emergency assistance that somehow transformed into perpetual obligation. About that, I said, leaning against the counter. I know about the cruise. Mom froze momentarily before resuming her movement now, wiping down already clean countertops. What cruise? The Caribbean cruise you and Dad took in April. The one you never mentioned while I was working overtime to pay for this house. Dad appeared in the doorway, his expression wary. It was a special package deal he offered weekly, very discounted. That's not the point, I said, working to keep my voice level. The point is that you claimed you couldn't even afford property taxes, yet somehow found money for a luxury vacation. Do you understand how that makes me feel? Mom turned to face me, dish towel twisted between her hands. We deserved a vacation after everything we've been through. Your father's job loss, my arthritis, the stress of the pandemic. Are you really begrudging us one small pleasure? Small pleasure. It was a 10-day cruise that probably cost thousands of dollars. So now you're monitoring our spending, deciding what we're allowed to enjoy. Her voice took on the wounded tone I knew so well, the one that had made me back down countless times before. I'm not monitoring anything, I said. But when I'm paying your $2,000 mortgage every month, postponing my own life goals to do it, and then discover you're taking expensive vacations without even mentioning them, yes, I have questions. Dad stepped further into the kitchen. Son, we appreciate everything you do for us. You know that. Do I? Because it feels like what I do is expected rather than appreciated. When was the last time either of you asked about my life, my stress, my relationships? It's always about what you need next. Mom scoffed. Oh, here we go with the self-pity. We raised you, fed you, clothed you, put you through college. I worked full-time through college. I paid rent while living here. I've been contributing to this household since I was 16 years old. And that's what family does, she shot back. We sacrifice for each other. Your father and I sacrificed everything for you children. I took a deep breath, trying to return to my planned talking points. Look, I didn't come here to argue. I wanted to discuss establishing a timeline for reducing my financial support. Not immediately, but gradually. So you can adjust. Is this about the kitchen renovation? Mom interrupted. Because the Andersons... I don't care what the Andersons did. My voice rose despite my efforts. This isn't about the neighbors. This is about sustainability. I cannot afford to pay your mortgage, my rent, and fund a $30,000 kitchen renovation. It's not financially possible. So you're abandoning us, Mom said flatly. After everything we've done for you, I'm not abandoning anyone. I'm asking for a reasonable adjustment to an arrangement that was supposed to be temporary. Dad has been eligible for Social Security for 2 years, but hasn't applied. You haven't worked since Rachel graduated high school. There are options here that don't involve me draining my savings account every month. Mom's face flushed with anger. How dare you suggest I get some retail job at my age? With my arthritis. Your arthritis didn't stop you from ziplining in Jamaica, I countered. Brad from my office was on your excursion. He mentioned meeting a fun couple from Portland named Richard and Martha. The color drained from her face, replaced immediately by a deeper red. Dad looked at the floor. You've been spying on us, she sputtered. It was a coincidence. But it confirmed what I've suspected for a while, that the financial hardship you claim isn't entirely accurate. I pulled out my phone. In fact, I took the liberty of researching property tax records. You claimed you couldn't afford the $4,000 due last quarter, so I paid it. But your investment account at Fidelity had a deposit of $5,000 that same month. Their shocked expressions confirmed my suspicions. They hadn't expected me to investigate, to question, to verify. You had no right to look into our private accounts, Mom said, her voice shaking. The account is listed on your tax return, which I helped prepare last year. Remember, I'm not a detective, Mom. I'm just not blind anymore. Dad finally spoke up. Carmen, we should all calm down and discuss this rationally. Your mother and I appreciate your support more than we can say. If you're feeling financial pressure, maybe we can find a compromise. It was the most reasonable thing either of them had said all night, but Mom wasn't having it. There's nothing to compromise about, she snapped. Either he cares about his family or he doesn't. That's not fair, I said. I've demonstrated my care through years of financial support that went far beyond what most children do for their parents. I've paid your mortgage, your property taxes, your car insurance, and even your credit card minimum payments at times. All while you took vacations, bought new furniture, and lived as if nothing had changed after Dad lost his job. So this is your father's fault now. For losing his job, Mom's voice rose sharply. I never said that. Job loss happens. But it's been 4 years and there's been no plan for self-sufficiency, no reduction in spending, no acknowledgement of reality. Instead, I'm expected to work myself to exhaustion while you plan kitchen renovations. The argument continued to escalate, with Mom growing increasingly defensive and Dad making ineffectual attempts at peacekeeping. I listed specific examples of financial support I'd provided beyond the mortgage: the roof repair last year, the emergency furnace replacement, the property tax payments. With each example, Mom found a way to characterize my assistance as merely fulfilling familial obligation rather than extraordinary generosity. The breaking point came when I mentioned their hidden savings account at Pacific Northwest Credit Union, an account I'd discovered while helping them consolidate bills last fall. containing nearly $20,000 they'd never disclosed. Mom's face contorted with rage. "You, ungrateful invasive," she sputtered. "After everything we've sacrificed for you, if you can't support this family properly, then get out and never come back." The words hung in the air, sharp and venomous. Dad's face registered shock, but he said nothing to contradict her. The silence that followed was deafening. In that moment, something broke inside me, not in a destructive way, but like a dam finally giving way to pressure that had built up for years. I felt oddly calm, seeing with perfect clarity what I should have recognized long ago. I wasn't valued as a son, but as a financial resource. "Okay," I said quietly, picking up my jacket from the chair where I'd laid it. "If that's how you feel." Carmen, Dad started but stopped when Mom shot him a look. I walked to the door without another word, a strange sense of peace washing over me despite the pain. As I reached for the doorknob, I heard Mom's voice again, slightly less certain. "You'll be back. You always come back." I didn't turn around. "Not this time," I said, and closed the door behind me. The drive home was surreal. Tears blurred my vision at times, but they weren't entirely tears of sadness. There was relief mixed in the unexpected lightness of setting down a burden I'd carried for too long. As painful as the evening had been, it had also been clarifying. The relationship I thought I had with my parents wasn't the relationship that actually existed. And that knowledge, however heartbreaking, was strangely freeing. That night I barely slept. I lay awake replaying the argument, alternating between doubt and conviction. Had I overreacted? Was I abandoning my parents? Then I'd remember Mom's words, "Get out and never come back," and the fact that Dad had stood by silently as she said them. No, I hadn't overreacted. I'd finally reacted appropriately after years of accepting mistreatment. By morning, my phone showed 3 text messages from Dad. "Your mother didn't mean what she said. She was just upset about how you brought things up. Let's talk when everyone's calmer." No apology, no acknowledgement of the real issues. Just the familiar pattern of smoothing things over without addressing the underlying problems. I didn't respond. Mom maintained radio silence for days. No calls, no texts, no emails. It was the longest we'd gone without communication since I'd moved out of their house. The absence of her demands was jarring but also revealing. She was waiting for me to make the first move to apologize for daring to question their financial behavior. It was a standoff I had no intention of ending this time. A week after the argument, Rachel called. "Mom says you accused them of stealing from you and threatened to make them homeless," she said without preamble. "What's going on?" I laughed despite myself. That's not even close to what happened. I explained the actual conversation, including the cruise discovery and the hidden savings account. "That sounds more believable," Rachel sighed. "Derek and I wondered how they afforded that cruise. Mom told us it was a gift from Dad's old colleagues." "Have they asked you for money yet?" I asked. "Not directly, but Mom mentioned how stressful their financial situation has become recently." I was confused since I thought you were handling the mortgage. "I have been, for 4 years. Jesus, Carmen. I had no idea it was still ongoing. They told us it was just for a few months after Dad lost his job." These conversations with my siblings revealed how differently our parents presented reality to each of us, compartmentalizing their narratives to maximize sympathy and support while minimizing accountability. The following weekend, I met Mike for our regular Saturday lunch. "You look different," he observed as I sat down. "Haven't been sleeping great," I admitted. "No, it's not that. You look lighter, somehow." He studied my face. "You finally did it, didn't you? You confronted them." I nodded, recounting the disastrous dinner and explosive argument. Mike listened without interrupting, then raised his glass when I finished. "About damn time," he said. "I'm proud of you." "I feel guilty," I confessed. "What if they really can't afford the mortgage? What if they lose the house? That's not on you, Carmen. They're adults who made their own financial decisions, including the decision to lie to you about their situation while taking your money. My Tuesday therapy session with Dr. Wilson focused entirely on the confrontation and its aftermath. What you're experiencing is the discomfort of changing established family dynamics, she explained. You've disrupted a system that, while dysfunctional, was familiar and predictable. It's normal to feel conflicted. But shouldn't I help my parents if I can? I asked. Help and enabling are different things, she replied. Help empowers the recipient toward independence. Enabling creates dependency, and often involves deception, as you've discovered. The question isn't whether you should help your parents. It's whether what you've been doing is actually helping them at all. That distinction stayed with me as I began researching my parents' financial situation more thoroughly. Using information I already had access to from tax preparation and bill consolidation, I created a comprehensive picture of their finances. What I found was infuriating. Dad had been receiving a partial pension I'd known nothing about. They had the savings account with $20,000. Mom's occasional sales from her online craft store actually generated around $1,000 monthly in unreported income. Between these sources, Social Security eligibility, and potential part-time work, they could comfortably afford their mortgage and expenses without my assistance. They'd been lying to me for years, creating artificial emergencies to extract money they didn't actually need. My anger gradually transformed into resolve. I would not resume mortgage payments. This wasn't spite. It was recognition that my support had become harmful to both them and me. They needed to face financial reality, and I needed to establish boundaries that should have existed long ago. I set up an automatic transfer to move the $2,000 I'd been spending on their mortgage into my own savings account instead. The first transfer felt both terrifying and exhilarating. Money that was rightfully mine staying with me for the first time in years. After careful consideration, I drafted an email to both parents, Mom and Dad. I've given our last conversation considerable thought. Based on the financial research I've done and the discoveries I've made about your actual financial situation, I've decided to permanently end my contributions to your mortgage and other expenses. This isn't a decision I've made lightly or out of anger. It's one I've made because, 1. You have the resources to support yourselves without my assistance. 2. The current arrangement has damaged our relationship. 3. I need to prioritize my own financial well-being after years of neglecting it. I hope we can eventually have a relationship based on mutual respect rather than financial dependency. I'm open to that possibility when you're ready to acknowledge the patterns that led us here. Carmen. I sent it on a Sunday evening, then immediately turned off my phone, anticipating the barrage of calls and texts that would follow. When I turned it back on Monday morning, I had 17 missed calls and 32 text messages, some pleading, some angry, some attempting to induce guilt. I read them all, but responded to none. The time for circular conversations had passed. That week was strange but liberating. Without the constant drain on my finances and emotional energy, I found myself more focused at work. The Franklin project began moving forward more smoothly as I brought renewed concentration to problem solving. I started going to the gym again after months of claiming I was too busy. I called friends I'd neglected. Small pleasures I'd denied myself. A new pair of running shoes, dinner at my favorite restaurant, concert tickets, suddenly seemed reasonable rather than extravagant. My siblings were surprisingly supportive. It's about time, Derek said during our weekly call. They've been taking advantage of you for years. Rachel and I feel guilty we didn't help more, but honestly, we didn't know the extent of it. It's not your responsibility, I assured him. It shouldn't have been mine either, but I allowed it to happen. The guilt I'd anticipated feeling was present but manageable, a dull ache rather than the crushing weight I'd feared. When I examined it closely, I realized much of it wasn't genuine guilt but conditioned response to breaking free from manipulative patterns. In therapy, Dr. Wilson helped me recognize that my parents' financial irresponsibility wasn't something I could fix no matter how much money I gave them. Their problems were behavioral and psychological, not merely financial. For the first time in years, I looked at my own future with excitement rather than resignation. Maybe I could buy a house after all. Maybe I could take a vacation that didn't involve responding to my parents' emergencies from a hotel room. Maybe I could date without dreading the inevitable "why do you support your capable parents" conversation. The freedom was intoxicating, but I remained prepared for the fallout. I knew my parents wouldn't accept this new reality without a fight. They had too much to lose, not just financially, but in terms of control and self-image. The question wasn't if they would escalate their efforts to pull me back into the old pattern, but when and how. I steeled myself for the coming storm, determined to maintain the boundaries I'd finally established. The first mortgage payment date after our confrontation came and went. According to the payment schedule, $2,000 should have been automatically transferred from my account to the mortgage company on the 5th of the month. Instead, that money went into my newly established future home savings account. I half expected the world to stop turning when I didn't make the payment, but of course nothing catastrophic happened immediately. For 10 full days after missing that payment, I heard nothing from either parent. The silence was both unnerving and refreshing. I kept expecting the other shoe to drop. Angry phone calls, tearful voicemails, flying monkeys dispatched to make me feel guilty. Instead, there was just nothing. I knew it couldn't last, but I appreciated the respite while it did. During this unusual quiet period, I focused on myself with an intensity that felt almost foreign. Years of putting my parents' needs first had left me disconnected from my own wants and needs. I scheduled a long overdue physical with my doctor. I reactivated my dormant dating profile. I consulted with a financial advisor about retirement planning, something I'd postponed while emptying my accounts to support my parents. The most immediate pleasure was simple: using my money for things that brought me joy. I bought tickets to a jazz festival I'd wanted to attend for years. I upgraded my ancient laptop. I even splurged on a weekend photography workshop in the Columbia River Gorge, a hobby I'd abandoned due to lack of time and funds. These weren't extravagant expenditures, but they represented something profound: my right to prioritize my own happiness. My work performance improved dramatically. Without constant family drama draining my energy, I brought renewed focus to the Franklin project. We made up the 2-week delay, and were actually ahead of schedule by mid-month. My boss, Jeffrey, commented on the change during our weekly check-in. "Whatever you're doing differently, keep doing it," he said. "I haven't seen you this sharp in months." Dating also became less complicated. I'd had a coffee date with Allison, a landscape architect I'd met through the photography workshop. When she asked about my family, I gave an honest but concise explanation of our estrangement. In the past, I would have minimized the dysfunction, made excuses for my parents, and inevitably revealed the financial burden I carried. This time, I simply acknowledged the unhealthy dynamics and explained that I was establishing better boundaries. She seemed to appreciate the honesty rather than being scared off by it. Around day 12 of the silence, my siblings checked in. Rachel called first. "Have you heard from Mom and Dad?" she asked, her voice tinged with concern. "Not a word," I replied. "Have you?" "Mom called yesterday asking if I could loan them $2,000 for an unexpected expense. When I asked what happened, she got vague and changed the subject. I felt a twinge of vindication. Let me guess. She didn't mention that the unexpected expense was their mortgage payment that I'm no longer covering. Nope. And when I brought up our conversation about the situation, she said you were exaggerating and going through something. I told her I couldn't afford to send money right now, and she got off the phone pretty keen. Quickly after that, Derek reported a similar conversation with Dad. He tried to make it sound like they were victims of some financial scam and needed help recovering. When I pressed for details, he admitted it was about the mortgage. I asked why you weren't helping anymore, and he said you were working through some personal problems and they were giving you space. The narrative they were creating was predictable but still infuriating. Rather than acknowledging the legitimate issues I'd raised, they were painting me as unstable or selfish themselves as patient, long-suffering parents dealing with a problematic child. It was gaslighting at its finest. They're rewriting history, I told Dr. Wilson during our next session, making me the villain in a story where they're innocent victims. That's very common in families with entrenched dysfunctional patterns, she explained. When one member changes the pattern, others often respond by doubling down on the narrative that supports their preferred dynamic. It's threatening when someone stops playing their assigned role. While my parents weren't contacting me directly, they were making their displeasure known through other channels. My Aunt Sylvia called to tell me how worried everyone was about my sudden change in behavior. A family friend mentioned seeing my mother at the grocery store where she'd tearfully confided that her son was going through a difficult phase. My parents' Facebook posts became thinly veiled references to ingratitude and abandonment, never naming me specifically but clearly intended for their social circle to connect the dots. These passive-aggressive tactics might have worked in the past, making me question my perceptions and decisions. Now they only strengthened my resolve. Each manipulation attempt confirmed that I'd made the right choice in establishing boundaries. The second missed mortgage payment approached and passed. This time I received a single text from Dad Bank, sent another late notice. "Is there a problem with your account?" It was so perfectly aligned with their approach. Pretending nothing had changed. Assuming I'd simply forgotten or encountered a technical issue. Maintaining the fiction that I would certainly resume payments once the misunderstanding was cleared up. I didn't respond. 3 days later, he tried again. Carmen, the mortgage company, called. "We need to discuss this." I finally replied with a brief message. I sent an email explaining my decision. Nothing has changed. His response came quickly. "Your mother said things she regrets. We should talk in person." I turned off my phone for the rest of the evening, unwilling to be drawn into a text-based negotiation that would inevitably lead nowhere productive. When I checked messages the next morning, there were several more from Dad, growing increasingly concerned about the mortgage situation. Not once did he acknowledge my legitimate grievances or the financial deceptions I'd uncovered. It was all about the immediate problem of the unpaid bill. The physical benefits of reducing this stress were becoming noticeable. The persistent headaches I'd attributed to work pressure disappeared. I slept better. The stress-induced eczema on my hands cleared up. Friends commented that I looked healthier, more relaxed, younger. "It's like you've been carrying a 100-pound backpack for years and finally took it off," Mike observed during our Saturday lunch. "The difference is written all over you." My confidence in my decisions strengthened daily. Each mortgage payment I redirected to my own savings represented a reclamation of not just money but self-worth. Each day without capitulating to guilt or manipulation was a victory for my future. The journey wasn't easy. I still experienced moments of doubt and waves of conditioned guilt. But the overall trajectory was toward healing and self-determination. Around week 3, Mom finally broke her silence with a single text. "We raised you better than this." I didn't respond. Her message contained everything I needed to know about her perspective. No acknowledgement of wrongdoing. No recognition of my legitimate concerns. Just disappointment that I'd stopped fulfilling her expectations. It was actually clarifying in its complete lack of self-awareness. By the end of the month, I'd created clear systems for maintaining my boundaries. I checked messages from my parents once daily, never before bed. I had stock responses prepared for flying monkeys. "This is between my parents and me, but I appreciate your concern." I'd warned my siblings about potential financial requests, so they wouldn't be blindsided. I'd even practiced phrases for inevitable future confrontations. "I understand you're upset, but my decision stands. I'm open to rebuilding our relationship, but not our financial arrangement. I care about you, but I won't enable harmful patterns anymore." I felt prepared for whatever came next. I just didn't expect it to be my father showing up unannounced at my apartment on a Saturday morning, looking simultaneously apologetic and indignant, determined to re-establish the status quo that had served them so well and me so poorly for all these years. The knock came at 9:15 on a Saturday morning. I wasn't expecting anyone. Allison and I had plans for dinner that evening, but nothing earlier in the day. When I checked the peephole and saw my father shifting uncomfortably in the hallway, my heart rate immediately accelerated. I considered pretending I wasn't home, but that seemed cowardly. This confrontation was inevitable. Better to handle it on my terms in my space. I opened the door but didn't invite him in immediately. "Dad, this is unexpected." He attempted a casual smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Can a father visit his son without an appointment?" "You could have called first," I said, but stepped aside to let him enter. I noticed he was carrying a small paper bag from Willow Bakery, my childhood favorite. A peace offering, or more likely, a manipulation tool. Brought those cinnamon rolls you always liked, he said, confirming my suspicion. He glanced around my apartment, taking in the new television and the brochures for the Columbia Gorge photography workshop on my coffee table. His expression tightened slightly before he controlled it. Coffee, I offered, taking the bag but placing it on the counter unopened. Sure, he replied, sitting awkwardly on my couch. He seemed thrown off by my calm demeanor. In past disagreements, I'd always been the one to extend olive branches to smooth things over to re-establish comfort at my own expense. My new approach was clearly disorienting for him. I prepared 2 coffees in silence, giving him the opportunity to state his real purpose for visiting. He filled the quiet with inconsequential small talk, comments about the weather, a question about my building's amenities, an observation about the construction site visible from my window. I responded politely but didn't elaborate or ask follow-up questions. Finally, as I handed him his coffee, he sighed. "Carmen, we need to talk about what's going on." I sat in the armchair across from him, rather than beside him on the couch. "I'm listening." He seemed thrown by my directness. "Well, it's about, the situation with the house payments." "What about them?" I kept my tone neutral. His discomfort visibly increased. He'd clearly expected me to jump in to offer explanations or justifications to make this easier for him. When I didn't, he finally got to the point. "Why did you stop paying the mortgage, Carmen?" "We've received notices from the bank. They're threatening late fees. If this continues, it could affect our credit score." The way he phrased it, as if I'd inexplicably abandoned a responsibility that was rightfully mine, was so disconnected from reality that I almost laughed. Instead, I responded calmly. "I stopped paying because Mom told me to get out and never come back." Those were her exact words. I decided to take her seriously. He shifted uncomfortably. "You know how your mother gets when she's upset. She says things she doesn't mean. You shouldn't take it literally." "Why not?" "She's a grown woman who chose her words deliberately. Why shouldn't I respect her enough to believe she meant what she said?" This reframing visibly confused him. He'd expected apologies, defensiveness, or guilt from me. Not this calm, reasoned stance. "She was just angry about how you brought things up," he tried, blindsiding us with accusations about the cruise and our accounts. "I didn't blindside anyone. I invited you both to dinner specifically to discuss finances." Mom redirected the conversation repeatedly. And they weren't accusations. They were facts. Facts you haven't denied notice. He looked down at his coffee. "We should have mentioned the cruise. That was wrong. But it was a special offer through Dad's old work friends. It wasn't as expensive as you think. The cruise is just one example, Dad. I've discovered quite a bit about your actual financial situation over the past month. The partial pension you receive, Mom's craft income, the savings account at Pacific Northwest Credit Union, your investment account at Fidelity." I leaned forward. "You have the resources to pay your own mortgage. You have for years. Yet you let me drain my savings and put my life on hold to cover it." His face paled slightly. "You've been investigating our finances. That's an invasion of privacy, Carmen. Most of this information was already available to me from helping with your taxes and bills. The rest was simple research anyone could do. But that's beside the point. The issue isn't how I know. It's that you and Mom deliberately misled me about your financial situation to extract money you didn't actually need." "That's not true," he protested, but weakly. "We've been struggling since I lost my job." "You lost your job 4 years ago, Dad. You've been eligible for Social Security for 2 years but haven't applied. Mom hasn't sought work despite being perfectly capable. And despite this supposed struggling, you've taken vacations, bought new furniture, and requested luxury renovations, all while I paid your mortgage." He stared at me, seemingly at a loss for words. I continued laying out the evidence I'd gathered about their actual financial situation versus what they'd presented to me. With each point, his denials grew weaker, until finally he changed tactics. "Your mother expected this to blow over," he admitted. She thought you'd cool down and things would go back to normal after a few weeks. She didn't think you'd actually stop the payments. That's exactly the problem, I said. You both view my boundaries as temporary inconveniences to work around rather than legitimate positions to respect. You assumed I'd fall back into the pattern of sacrificing my financial well-being for yours despite having every reason not to. He leaned forward, expression earnest. Son, we appreciate everything you've done for us. More than you know. But this house, it's been in our family for 30 years. If we lose it because of this disagreement— Stop, I interrupted firmly. That's emotional manipulation, and we both know it. You won't lose the house unless you choose to. You have the resources to pay the mortgage. If you don't, that's a decision you're making, not something I'm doing to you. His facade of reasonableness cracked slightly. So you're completely abandoning your responsibilities to your family. Just like that. Paying your mortgage was never my responsibility, Dad. It was something I chose to do temporarily during a crisis. That crisis ended years ago, but the arrangement continued because it benefited you and Mom. It's not abandonment to stop giving people something they're capable of providing for themselves. He was quiet for a moment, staring into his coffee cup. When he looked up, his expression had hardened. We've already made the late payments, he admitted. Had to take money from savings, but we managed it. The revelation didn't surprise me, but it confirmed what I'd suspected. They had the means all along. Then why are you here? Because this isn't just about money, Carmen. It's about family, about commitment, about respect. I agree completely, I replied, and respect goes both ways. You and Mom haven't respected me as an adult with my own financial needs and goals. You've treated me as a resource rather than a son. He shook his head. That's not true. We love you. We're proud of you. When was the last time either of you asked about my work, my relationships, my dreams? It's always been about what I can give you, never about who I am or what I need. His expression shifted between guilt and defensiveness. We're your parents. It's natural for children to support their parents in their older years. You're both in your late 50s, Dad, healthy and capable of working. This isn't end-of-life care we're talking about. It's subsidizing early retirement and discretionary spending you can't afford independently. The conversation continued in circles, with Dad alternating between appeals to family obligation, attempts to minimize their deception, and hints about the potential estrangement if I maintained my position. When these approaches failed, his tone grew sharper. After everything we've done for you, he said, this is how you repay us, by checking our accounts and cutting us off without warning. I sent a detailed email explaining my decision and the reasons behind it, I reminded him. And I gave you both plenty of opportunities to be honest about your finances before making this choice. You chose deception instead. He stood up abruptly. Your mother was right. You've changed, and not for the better. If you think money is more important than family— This isn't about money, I interrupted. It's about honesty, respect, and healthy boundaries. I'm open to having a relationship with you and Mom, but not one based on financial exploitation and emotional manipulation. His face flushed with anger. So that's it. You'll only be our son, on your terms. I'll only be in a relationship that's mutual and respectful. That's a reasonable boundary for any relationship, including family. He moved toward the door, shaking his head. I don't know what's happened to you, Carmen. The son we raised would never turn his back on his parents like this. The son you raised finally recognized his own worth, I replied calmly. I hope someday you will too. As he reached for the doorknob, he delivered what he clearly thought would be a devastating parting shot. If you won't help with the mortgage, don't expect to be welcomed in that house again. And don't expect us at whatever holidays or birthdays you might invite us to. You can't have it both ways. I met his gaze steadily. Then I guess we don't have a relationship anymore. That's your choice, not mine. For a brief moment I saw surprise and something like respect flicker across his face. He hadn't expected me to stand firm. Then his expression hardened again, and he left without another word, closing the door firmly behind him. I sat back down, hands shaking slightly but mind clear. The confrontation had been difficult but clarifying. My parents weren't interested in a relationship that didn't include financial support. They were willing to cut ties completely rather than adjust to new boundaries. It was painful to acknowledge but also oddly freeing. Their ultimatum removed any lingering guilt or uncertainty. They had shown me exactly who they were and what they valued. Now I could move forward with that knowledge, painful as it was. It's been just over a month since that final confrontation with my father, and my life has transformed in ways I couldn't have imagined. The absence of guilt I once feared has become a reality. Not because I've hardened my heart, but because I finally recognized that my parents' financial problems were largely self-created and entirely solvable without my intervention. 2 weeks after Dad's visit, I heard through Rachel that my parents had refinanced their mortgage, extending the term but lowering the monthly payment. They'd apparently also listed several expensive items on eBay, including the high-end golf clubs Dad had purchased last year while claiming they couldn't afford property taxes. These actions confirmed what I'd known all along. They were capable of solving their own financial problems when necessary. My relationship with my siblings has actually improved through this ordeal. Without the unequal dynamic of me carrying the entire financial burden, we've established more honest communication. Derek and I now have weekly video calls, and Rachel visited me in Portland last weekend. We've discussed our childhood and recognized patterns we all experience differently but simultaneously. Mom's emotional manipulation. Dad's conflict avoidance. The expectation that love was demonstrated through sacrifice, rather than support. I always felt guilty that you were shouldering everything, Rachel admitted during her visit. But Mom made it seem like you wanted to do it, that it made you happy to be the provider. I wanted to help during a legitimate crisis, I clarified. But it should have been temporary, and it should have been appreciated, rather than expected. The most surprising development came 3 weeks after Dad's visit. I received a text message from Mom, the first direct communication from her since the argument. "The garden is in bloom. Your father planted those tulips you always liked." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even an acknowledgement of the situation, but it was an overture, however small. I responded simply, "They always were beautiful in spring." This led to occasional superficial text exchanges, comments about the weather, neighborhood news, impersonal updates. No mention of money, no recriminations, no guilt trips. It was as if we were acquaintances rather than family, but it was communication nonetheless. Last weekend, after much consideration, I accepted an invitation to Sunday dinner at their house. I brought a bottle of wine, but no checkbook. The evening was awkward at times, but not hostile. Mom had clearly been coached, probably by Dad, to avoid certain topics. We discussed my work, Rachel's new apartment, Derek's summer travel plans. Normal family conversation, conspicuously avoiding any mention of finances. As I was leaving, Dad walked me to my car. "We refinanced the mortgage," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Got a better rate." "That's good," I replied neutrally. "Your mother and I have been re-evaluating some things, making adjustments." It wasn't an apology, but it was an acknowledgement that changes had been necessary. Coming from my conflict-avoidant father, it was significant. "I'm glad to hear that," I said. We stood in awkward silence for a moment before he cleared his throat. "That project you mentioned, the Franklin Tower, did it finish on schedule?" It was the first time in years he'd asked about my work with genuine interest, rather than as a segue to discussing their needs. A small step, but meaningful. At work, the changes have been dramatic. The Franklin project not only completed on time, but under budget, earning me a performance bonus and consideration for promotion to senior project manager. Jeffrey pulled me aside after the project debrief. "Whatever clicked for you these past few months, it's made a difference," he said. "You're focused, decisive, innovative. The team has noticed. My personal life has flourished as well. Allison and I have been dating for several weeks now, and unlike previous relationships, this one isn't burdened by constant family drama and financial strain." When she asked about my family after meeting them briefly at a restaurant, I was able to be honest without being bitter. We're rebuilding on new terms, I explained. It's a work in progress. That takes courage, she said. Standing up for yourself while still leaving room for reconciliation. The financial freedom has been life-changing. I've established a retirement account, created an emergency fund, and started saving for a down payment on a home, all things that seemed impossible while I was carrying my parents' mortgage. I've taken a photography class, joined a hiking group, and even booked a trip to Iceland next spring, something I've dreamed about for years but always deferred as an unaffordable luxury. Most importantly, I've learned crucial lessons about family boundaries and self-worth that will guide me moving forward. First, true support empowers others rather than enabling dependency. By continuing to pay my parents' mortgage despite their capacity for self-sufficiency, I wasn't helping them. I was preventing them from taking responsibility for their own choices. Second, love and financial support are separate things. My value as a son isn't measured by the size of my contributions to my parents' lifestyle. Real family relationships are based on mutual respect, not transactional exchanges. Third, boundaries aren't selfish. They're necessary for healthy relationships. By establishing clear limits on what I would and wouldn't do financially, I created the possibility for a more authentic connection with my parents, one based on choice rather than obligation. Fourth, the discomfort of confrontation is temporary, but the freedom of living authentically is lasting. Those difficult conversations were painful in the moment, but they opened the door to a life aligned with my values and priorities. Finally, you teach people how to treat you. By accepting exploitation for years, I taught my parents that it was acceptable. By standing firm in my new boundaries, I've begun teaching them, and myself, what kind of relationship is truly sustainable. The journey hasn't been easy, and our family relationships are still fragile, still evolving. My parents haven't fully acknowledged their manipulative behavior or apologized for the years of deception. But small changes suggest a willingness to adapt to new terms, rather than lose connection entirely. Whether this evolves into a truly healthy relationship remains to be seen, but I'm approaching it with clear eyes and firm boundaries. If you're in a similar situation, supporting family members who've come to expect your sacrifice without reciprocating with respect or gratitude, know that change is possible. It won't be comfortable. You'll be tested, guilt-tripped, and possibly threatened with estrangement. But on the other side of that discomfort is a life of authenticity and self-respect that's worth fighting for. Have you ever had to establish difficult boundaries with family members? How did you handle the guilt and pressure to return to old patterns? Share your experiences in the comments below. Your story might help someone else find the courage to make necessary changes in their own life. And if this resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with others who might be struggling with similar family dynamics. Remember, standing up for yourself isn't selfish. It's essential for building relationships based on mutual respect rather than exploitation. Thank you for listening to my story, and I wish you strength and clarity in your own journey toward healthier boundaries.